The revolution is of the mind.
Technology will empower our future or run us over. How we choose to think will determine our fate.
Better thoughts, better life. Welcome to Thought Hacking with Scott Mitchell.
Welcome. Hey, I'm Scott Mitchell, and I welcome you to Thought Hacking. I am here today with Michael Cassentini, and it's going to be a real treat. He is an expert in improv comedy. He is an alumni from Second City. If you've heard of Second City before, he has spent his career doing stand-up comedy, improv comedy. He's an entrepreneur. He's been involved in over 11,000 episodes online and offline, creating content, and he's just generally kind of a boring guy. So I want to introduce him, and so tell us about yourself a little bit. You know, how did you get so boring?
Well, first of all, thanks, Scott. I guess I just do monotonous things that don't make a lot of sense to a lot of people. I mean, to be one who has the ability to entertain crowds and perform in front of people, one of which is the stand-up comedy world, which, from what I understand is probably the biggest fear for most people is public speaking outside of death. You know what I mean? And so, but then also being an entrepreneur, I'm kind of a rare bird. I've come to find, especially in this town, where it's like you're either an entertainer or you're the business. You're never the entertainer and the business simultaneously. That having the ability to use both sides of your brain tends to be not as common as some would think.
Yeah, I think that's really true. It's a totally different element of the brain. Yeah. So, what fascinates me is I feel like comedy is so important, but it's something that is kind of an enigma, I think, for a lot of us. Like, how do we make people laugh? How do we connect with people? And my favorite element of that sometimes is what you can see with improv comedy, because you've got to be so in the moment. You've got to allow your brain to quickly adjust and turn that into something playful and humorous. So tell us about what you've learned about like humor and comedy from that experience.
Yeah, well, there was the king of or the somewhat the creator of improv comedy is a guy by the name of Del Close, and a lot of improv groups, including Second City, as well as some Del actually created the Improv Olympic West and East, which was an offshoot of Second City, using his Herald style approach to sketch comedy. But it's the one thing that you learn that I think is the most, prominent thing is the ability to yes and things, right? Mm-hmm. When you live in an improv world, you only, hurt yourself and your scene partners when you deny what they're trying to introduce, right? So you have to kind of, even if it's ridiculous, you have to still accept it, work from it, and build. Right. And I think that in anything in life is important, because we can kibosh or poo-poo anything that comes our way if we don't like it. But the reality is that you should really focus on, well, what if I can enhance this by saying yes and include something to build from that? Because that's the most important thing, I think, is just to, we're not always right. We're not always the one who's got the best ideas, and sometimes you've got to let other people share rather than just, it's my way or the highway approach,
Yeah. I actually think that's beautiful. I think it's a really cool tool that you can use in, like you said, in regular life too, because I feel like, a lot of times when you're having an interaction with someone, whether it's in business or anything in life, there's sometimes this tension, because they'll say something and you're like, well, no, but, it's like no, but instead of yes, and. Right. And sometimes the better approach seems to be like just kind of saying like, hey, yes, and then now let me add something. So instead of being like confrontational, you can, even if where they're going is a strange place, you kind of roll with it for a second, and then you can steer it back toward a place that's maybe healthier or whatever. And
yeah, I mean, one thing that I found, even being, working in creating businesses like the network studios where we're at today is you have to play the part of follow through person, meaning, you're helping people create content. You're working at recording things. You've got physical assets that you're creating in real time. But then there's also the salesman, right? The person who's going to take the call, explain what we do. And in those calls, typically I get a lot of people who there's a lot of people who have experienced creating what we call podcasting, which I refer to as the audio version of things. And then we've got what I call vodcasting or VOD cast, which is video on demand casting, that we're seeing more and more done today. But the reality for me is, you talk to people who may not have experience and you try to advise them as to what are people doing often in this space? How are they, because a lot of people, I think they watch something or they see, they've got a favorite thing that they do. I'm a television guy, so I grew up with the 24-minute, 30-minute shows, right? Because they're always going to have commercials, or the 45 to 60-minute shows because they're going to have commercials. You think it's a 60-minute show, but if you account for the commercial breaks, it's less, right? And so when I talk to clients all the time who come in and they go, yeah, we're going to do an hour, 90 minutes, recording with our guest and everything else. I go, is that what you're delivering? Are you delivering a 90? And they'll go, yeah, man, that's what we do. And I go, why? And they go, well, because that's, we kind of, we get really going by 45 minutes in. And so, and it reminds me of even being a stand-up comedian. Boy, if you don't get these people, if you don't get going at 5 minutes, nobody's going to care when it's 15, 20, and you're still ramping things up.
Right.
You've got to move.
Yeah.
And I always advise people all the time about thinking, especially if you're getting started, thinking about doing things that you can attain in a shorter time frame, leveraging your time more appropriately, because you can spend, you've got, in my business, you've got an hour minimum in a room, and you could definitely spend 90 minutes in the room, and you get a bill for 90 minutes, but what do you create in an hour? What do you create in 90 minutes? And I try to advise people, again, especially those who haven't established a show, about creating short form content and producing more of that and delivering that more frequently, because there's something to be said about, listener retention and honestly, keeping them engaged. When you are a once a week type show, or every other week, you're not really engaging, even though you've delivered an hour's worth of content to them in that time frame. You're not really engaging them as much as you have to today to compete with all of the content that's out there. A show that produces content 5 days a week at 15 minutes is better than a show that produces 1 hour once a week, period. And there's no way around that. It's quite frankly because you are more visible with a frequency that makes, the algorithms and things, in the internet space, they appreciate something that gets, modified daily rather than something that gets modified every 2 months. You know what I mean? And so I try to advise my clients, but going back to the point, it's like, I sit there and I don't go, oh, you're doing a 90-minute, show. Oh, that's dumb. I say, these are my recommendations. And
wait, am I the only one you did that to?
I try to just make things fun, quite frankly. But I just call them recommendations and say, these are what's trending. And I think that's what differentiates me from the rest of the pack. As I've been kind of a leader in the podcast studio world, I started, in 2012 out of my home, and I've progressively built bigger and bolder things. I moved from a 1-bedroom apartment where I started to a 2-bedroom, where I took the 2nd bedroom and made it a completely, isolated recording studio with multiple mics, and we converted the closet into a voiceover booth, and it was this major overhaul on a rental property. I spent thousands of dollars putting walls in front of walls, much like I've done here in the network studios in Culver City. And then I had to decommission it when I left, right? Because obviously I'm not going to leave it the way, I changed it. I had to return it to the way that the owner whose rental property it was expected it to be. But I've always been that kind of person wanting to make, these environments work especially when you've got road noise and other things, or you got people passing, as it was in my former location, we had an alleyway up against our studio, so you had like the garbage trucks that would drive into the alleyway to pick up trash, and you had to kind of minimize that intrusion, especially if you were going to be having people come in and pay, to record themselves in your place. But, I have, I've taken a lot of risk, creating it, but I always found it, kind of normal, especially being a boy who grew up in the Bay Area and watched, the Silicon Valley movement and the .com boom. I was there for all of that. And you always, see entrepreneurs who start things out of their garage, like Apple and the like, right? And so I always felt privileged to be able to kind of start my business in my home and take that, burden of never being able to leave the shop, especially, when you sleep there, it's just, you're constantly working, quite frankly, and you're inviting strangers into your home all the time. But then, when we moved it here and grew the business into a multi-room capable, studio, that was the ultimate goal. It was to be able to sort of go, can I produce, 3 rooms working simultaneously, and there would bring in the real dough. You know what I mean? So, but it's been a journey, and it's been fun because, talking to people about their projects, getting them to understand trends, being able to, understand, today we may be doing things this way, and tomorrow we should be ready to pivot because this is going to be the new way. And what we've seen even in this business is just moving from everybody wanting to do audio only to everybody now. I mean, it was 90+% audio only when I started in 12. And then it now, as we moved into 2015, 16, it became 50% audio, 50% video. And now we're living in a 90+% video. Everybody's doing it. And they all call, even their video shows, they all call them podcast, which is, right. I always joke with people, I'm going like, well, that when you ask for a tissue paper and you call it Kleenex, you're calling out a brand, right? Kleenex is a brand that makes tissue paper. You know what I mean? But tissue paper is what you want. You want a tissue, and I think when people say that their video is a podcast, I go, well, where is it? Are you producing a podcast that's going to be available on podcast platforms like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon, etc.? Or are you just putting up your show in YouTube? No, I'm just putting it up on YouTube. Well, you're a vodcast to me. You know what I mean?
Yeah, we're on both, by the way. No, I'm just kidding.
Well, and you should be. Diversifying yourself can be very important. I think that in the podcasting world, diversifying yourself on all the platforms makes more sense. If you're a video project and you're paying for that time to create that video asset, I always tell my clients, look, what do you want more eyes on? You just spent a bunch of money to make a video. Yep. And would you prefer people to go, I'm less interested in watching that thing, and I'd rather go listen. Yep. And what I always say to people, there's no reason why somebody can't turn on number 2 in search, which is YouTube effectively, and listen to the content and not watch it. I mean, it's like they just can put the phone down, put some ears on and just listen, Yeah.
Well, that's why when I started podcasting, it was because I wanted a place where I could kind of take some of the content out of my mind and make it accessible to people. And so I started with pure audio format. Yeah. And when you're doing a solo cast, sometimes it's easier because you can edit more easily when it's audio only or whatnot. But I think there's so much power to video, and I feel like it's good to have both. Sometimes audio is better because you're doing something else and you can listen and consume information, whereas video, you're kind of all in. You can't just be listening. But this is why it's so powerful to be able to do both. And so for those of you that don't know, that are listening to this in an audio version, we now do, a lot of these are going to be on YouTube and on the video as well, because I think it's another way to connect with people. And also you can share the authenticity a little more easily when you can see someone. You can experience the full body language and all of that together, which is pretty cool. Real quick, I wanted to ask you about this because you've done a lot of things that are risky, right? Being an improv comedy is risky, right? Being a stand-up comedian is risky. Being an actor, there's risk. But also, being an entrepreneur, as I am, it can be very risky and very vulnerable. But all these things are risky and vulnerable. So how do you manage your mind in a situation that's risky and vulnerable, especially in the moment?
I like to get into deep depression. Especially when I'm hemorrhaging money to pay for Dream. It's can be difficult, because you're for me, I've invested so much of my time and money into everything that I do, and the pressure of not recouping right away or at all, like this business, even, it has ebb and flows, we've been hit by, COVID really hard, and it's great to still be here, then all of a sudden, right when we think we're rebounding from COVID, we get hit in Hollywood with the writers' strikes and all the strikes, which impacts all businesses. It's not, we think about, oh, it's going to impact my business because I'm here recording people in a studio, and people who don't have extra income aren't going to come, but it's impacting people who make sandwiches. It's impacting people who drive cars, and bring people to places. It's impacting people all over the place. And I think, that's been hard as well. But, as a risk taker, I enjoy, from the stand-up comedy and the improvisational side, I enjoy making people laugh. I enjoy humor, and the risks that you take on stage. I've never had a problem with it because, as a kid, I was the clown, I lived, the class clown. When I was in junior high school, I had been dubbed from 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, all 3 years, most likely to become a stand-up comic, something they've never bestowed to anybody. So as I understand, since I was a kid. And then I did it, and I did it for, I'm still doing it, not as frequently because I'm in this business and I just recently had a kid, but I'm working on a new special. But I've been in that business for 20 plus years, and I started out with 5 minutes of content, and I've worked my way up to having up to 60 plus minutes of content, and then always reshaping it, building new, and keeping it alive. But risk is my forte, and how to deal with it is just, I think having the ability to have levity in your life helps to reduce the tension that you get from the pressures of being an entrepreneur and dealing with putting your money where your mouth is.
Yeah, I think this is one of the things I find most profound about comedy is that the reason why comics oftentimes go after really emotional and current topics is because these are intense things. And I had somebody, actually, I did take a course at Second City, and the instructor, she said to me, life sucks and then you die.
Yeah.
And these are just facts. And life gets hard. And at the end, all of us are going to die. And so what humor does is it gives us a chance to just feel that lightheartedness and make fun of the situation we're in, which takes the pressure off. It allows us to reconnect with each other and to be more human and to laugh even in the face of adversity. And I think that's such a powerful force. So it's always fascinated me, but I think it's incredible to be able to create that for other people. So I think that's really neat.
I had a coach, I had a couple of coaches in my Second City experience. One of them was a guy by the name of Tom Booker. And Tom Booker, he was, or is an improv actor. And he's been featured in things like Curb Your Enthusiasm and other things. He's played like the limo driver. He's always had these roles that were kind of 2-bit, roles. But one of the things that I always remembered and thought was hilarious was that every time we were about to do a scene and we would select scene partners and we would get up on stage and it was that moment, but as we identify with what the scene is going to be about, because you kind of figure out certain elements to what the scene's going to be about, and then you go from there and improv around that. And my favorite thing was that before we would do anything, he's like, all right, you guys all set? And then we'd be like, okay, yeah, we're all set. And he goes, don't suck. And then we would start. That was how he started everything. And that, to me,
can I use that when the podcast
sure.
guest?
I mean, to me, I don't think anybody can trademark that, but that was how he did it. And when you weren't prepared for that, it was kind of a whoa, but it also, it's true, don't suck. I mean, it's entirely up to you,
Yeah.
but I think improv is so funny. Again, yes-anding and being able to take suggestion. I especially love sketch from the standpoint of like when you're doing heralds and things where you've got like an audience in front of you and you go, all right, what do you suggest, or what do you suggest, or what do you suggest, and you build from their perspective. It's what we're also seeing in stand-up comedy where, the stand-up comedy actually has gone through many renaissance moments, but I think the one that we're seeing right now, that's really on the surface is crowd work. I mean, if you go to a comedy show now, stand-up comedy show now, you're going to see a lot of crowd work. And the reason for that is because, one, everybody steals stuff and nobody wants to put out their material because people will take it and post it or take it. And so if you're building a true set, not with crowd work being the focus, the last thing you want is somebody in the East Coast being able to beat you at your own jokes. So that's why we're seeing a lot of crowd work. But I mean, I don't know if you've been to a stand-up comedy show lately, but you're probably seeing that comic or most of the comics of that night, if it's a 3+ comedy or comedian night, you're seeing 10 minutes plus of crowd work. Where back in the day when I started, it was like, get to the funny. It was jokes per minute. It was like set up, punch, set up, punch, set up, punch, set up, punch. You didn't dilly dally, but also we're dealing with people who qualify themselves as comedians because you could just type it on your Instagram profile. And I always tell aspiring comedians, I go, look, you can always be an aspiring comedian, there's nothing wrong with that, but you're really not a comedian until you get paid.
Right.
You're not. You can be funny.
Right.
You can be hilarious. You should be a comedian. I mean, you can get a lot of that, but you're not a comedian until you make money and, quite frankly, a living at doing it. That's why we have, the Chappelles of the world. And then we have people who, are just road comics, or people who, we call them road dogs when you're working the road and you're not really that visible, but a lot of people today are, have become famous through being popular in social platforms where I, to be critical about it, which I am as a human, I think comedy's taken a big hit in the mediocre place. You know what I'm saying? I think that comedy right now, I always tell a young comic too, I go, I don't know you, this audience doesn't know you. And we're going to find you funny, possibly by what you have to say, but I'd rather get your background story. I always appreciate the comedy that tells how they've grown up or how their life has been, or the relationship with their kids, the relationship with their wife. That's why Gaffigan's so great. Gaffigan's both telling his story about his kids and his family while simultaneous doing a lot of observational comedy. You know what I mean?
Yep.
But
he's one of my favorites for sure. I've gotten to see him on a live set, and he's fantastic.
Yeah, he's amazing. And for me, it's like, I don't really care, 18-year-old to 22-year-old stand-up comedian aspiring to be telling me about how they like or dislike the iPhone when I don't even know your backstory. Do you know what I mean? So you can focus a lot of energy on why you're here, and then eventually get, when you grow some legs, then eventually get into the, I'm going to, have a set that focuses on, my feelings about this or about that. I always talk about in my routine about dealing with weight. I've recently lost 51 pounds in the last 8 months. And I've done it,
Have you taken a second to just let that sink in and celebrate?
Oh my God. Yeah. I mean, it's like, I'm finally like, people are like, dude, you look good. What's wrong with you? And I'm like, cancer. But no, I just, it's been crazy because I haven't been under 200 pounds since I was in my early 20s, when I was an athlete and being very physical. And so I lost 20 in a short term. I lost, or 20, from 240, I went to 220, and that took me a while. And then from 220 to 200 took me very little time. And then now I'm just shredding pounds because now I'm in a routine that just, I'm trying to get down to my birth weight.
It's a pretty good goal. You could create a diet out of that. I feel like you might have a new business opportunity there.
I mean, whatever, but I'm fitting into clothes better. When you now have to tie the tie strap of your your sweatpants, you know what I mean? When you're tying those, that things have changed. You know
Feels
what I
good,
mean? Yeah. And I can put my hands on my hips and people are like, man, I can see it. And I go, good. I just don't want to turn this way. Because I'm still bloated.
Yeah, that's amazing. So you should definitely appreciate that accomplishment.
Yeah. But I talk in my routine about weight loss, and I talk about joining the gym. And one of the jokes that I have that is observational. I go, I'm not really into gyms. I don't really like, and that's weird because I go to the gym now, mostly because of indoor basketball and the sauna. But I joke about not liking to go to gyms because they're dirty, and people touch everything and whatnot. And for me, I always, I'm like, I just want to have the gym for the house. That's my big thing, right? And the other day I saw this commercial because I love all the commercials that they have for all these different appliances that you can buy and these different things, the Solo Flexes and the Bow Flexes and the this and the that. They got that one that I love the most with Chuck Norris and Christy Brinkley called the Total Gym. Have you seen this product, the Total Gym? By the way, it works because Christy Brinkley looks terrific for 135 years old, right? I mean, and then you got Chuck Norris who's got the line that sold it for me. He's like, I'm now 70 years old, and finally with the Total Gym, I'm now able to do all of the things I've ever wanted to do in my entire life. And I'm always like, what that means? Total Jim killed his wife. But then there's also I call the people for the Peloton, the bicycle that's a stationary bicycle that's got the computer. Now you got to, they always tell you to, drive hands free. I'm so glad that they just put this huge tablet on my stationary bike. I'm not going anywhere, but clearly I'm going somewhere, with this thing. And I asked the people on the, I called them up. I'm going like, this is a really interesting product. I want to get more information about it. And the woman cut me off who I was talking to. She goes, before we get into that, I got to ask you a couple of quick questions. I said, what? And she goes, well, first of all, do you live in a home that has floor to ceiling windows overlooking the Pacific Ocean? I said, no. And she goes, well, we can't sell you this thing then. It turns out that in order for you to have the Peloton, you have to have a house in Malibu, and you also have to have 1,600 square feet just for it. You know what I mean? That's kind of the game. But that's kind of what I do in my material is I bring in the things I'm thinking about as a person, because I definitely want to have a full-on gym in my house. I mean, who wouldn't want to be wealthy enough to be able to dedicate a portion of your home to working out? I mean, that'd be beautiful. I want to have that similar look at it. Like I'm going to a 24-hour fitness, but it's, either in my garage or I have a dedicated room, that I can devote to it. Like I see The Rock and Hart, Kevin Hart, all these guys, they all have their little, Mark Wahlberg, they all have their home situation. You know what I mean? And I'm like, damn, I wish I was wealthy enough to have that. But those, when you think about fitness, you think about these things, that's where it takes it home for me. And then I do the observational stuff, which, is commercial based and everything else. Cause, I can't afford a Peloton right now. Do you think I can, I have a bicycle that I just put on, blocks and I just try to.
Aren't there cars cheaper than Pelotons?
I mean, God, you can get a bunch of cars, right? I think you can get a Tesla before you can get a Peloton. You know what I mean?
Yep. So tell me, this has always fascinated me. In comedy, there seems to be this weird juxtaposition where comedians who are hilarious and they seem so much fun, they struggle often with depression or with challenges. And like, why is that? Why is there so much of a connection between kind of the sorrow side right along this happy and playful side?
I think that comedians tend to be sad clowns. And I think it's just the way we're wired, because there's not everybody is meant to be a comedian. People will try it and they'll find they're not being successful at it, and thus they bow out, and I have a lot of people who I've mentored and worked with that just, even I went to a wedding the other day where my friend, who's I met when he was 18 and now he's in his 30s, and he's got started as a young kid, and I was there every step of the way for him and mentoring him. I had years on top of him so that, it made sense for the mentorship. But, he's now, at his wedding, he made this announcement where he's like, yeah, I retired from, performing comedy. And he never made it to the same level that I had, where I was performing and making money and doing things like that. But he was always a funny kid. And I think, there's no rules here. You could go do, B rooms and C rooms, from a comedy perspective and do just fine. But for him to say that he's retired, I went up to him and I even went up to his parents and I go, don't worry, I got this. And cause they're all, yeah, just tell him, take a break. You're getting married. Nobody's forcing you to do anything, but to give up on it. I can never give up on it. You know what I mean? But people, they break and they can't sustain it. And I think you are funnier when you've actually gone through traumatic things.
Yeah.
I've been arrested. I've gone to jail. I have done stupid things. I have done all of the drugs. I have done all of the, relationship stuff. I've been involved in so many, I put myself out there, because I am that risk taker. And I have suffered from, depression and have thought, gotten therapy for it and things, but I don't, it's kind of like, if you grew up, entitled and just with no financial problems or anything, I don't think you're the funniest person on the block.
You don't have the material in your brain, in your heart.
Oh man, when I turned 16 and Dad gave me his hand-me-down Porsche, I was like, Dad, why would you give me your 2-year-old Porsche? I want a new one. There's nothing
People
funny
can't
in
relate,
that.
yeah.
You know what I mean? I grew up at a place in the Bay Area when I went to high school, and I didn't finish high school because one, I had learning disabilities that made it difficult for me to succeed in that type of environment. But the other thing was I was living in the peninsula. My mother had finally graduated from college, a late bloomer. She had me when she was 17, just past 16 actually. She just turned 17, and she I remember her graduating and getting her PhD in law when I was 16. So, here I am making my way into high school, and I moved from Berkeley to this very affluent, even though in any affluent area, there's still, lower to middle class folks that live within that circumference. But I'm living in an area that's got Atherton, which is, if you know anything about California, Atherton's one of the wealthiest towns in the state of California. I think at the time it was, 14th or, so it was like the richest town, in the country. It might've been third in the state. And it was places like where Charles Schwab had $100 million house, and like where Larry Ellison, and it was building his, man-made lake in Woodside, and you had, so growing up with so much wealth, and you had the kids that were being bused, into the school district because their schools had failed, and so you had animosity all over the place from the poor, and the wealthy kids were like, ugh, why, but you're seeing kids with brand new, Grand Cherokee Laredo packages, or the guy that's driving the Corvette to school, and all those things. And I felt, as I'm driving in a 1975 Volkswagen Rabbit I got for $500 from a family friend with a cracked windshield and 2 6x9s in the back, pumping my hip hop music as a white kid, and everybody's like, what the heck is up with this dude? My school was famous for Jerry Garcia. So Jerry Garcia graduated from my school. So the amount of deadheads that we had at the school, the amount of alternative music kids and all those kind of things. But when you just watched kids, like have American Express gold cards in their pocket, it's like, and you're sitting there not even, you're working. I was working at 14. You know what I mean? I was doing all the jobs I could possibly get my hands on to get cash, because it wasn't like my mom had any extra funds. You know what I mean? But it was a pretty alienating moment in life, you know, and that's where you find the funny, because you're just gonna point out everything you see. And I would always, you know, again, class clown it up, you know, criticizing all the stuff that I saw, just going like, look at you, you know, and worry in your life. I remember. I was dating a girl that was at a Catholic private school, and she, you know, had all the, you know, wealthy kids going to school. I remember when Larry Ellison, I forget his name, but when Larry would leave to go out of town, and I don't know if you're familiar with Larry Ellison's Oracle,
founder of Oracle,
right? Yeah. And a guy who owns an island, you know, in Hawaii.
Like third or fourth richest man in the world.
Yeah,
now,
he's got the B by his number. But that being said, you know, his kid's driving his multi-million-dollar McLaren to school. You know what I mean? And it's just like, you know, it was hard. It was hard to see that when you knew that you weren't going to get there probably in a lifetime, but simultaneously you knew that there was not going to be any chance that it was just you were going to stumble upon it, you know, or that somebody's going to be, you know, mom's going to make it rich. And then my mom is fine. She's well off now, but if my mom would never buy me a McLaren, regardless of if she had $1 billion, you know what I mean?
Right.
Because that's not how we were raised. You know, everybody's got to work for something. You know what I mean?
So that shaped you. It shaped your identity.
Yeah.
And so I've got a couple questions. I mean, one, so when you've gone through this, so you're out there road dogging it or out there dealing with rejection. I mean, obviously that's important. I mean, as an entrepreneur and as a comedian, who are you in your mind? What is your identity when you're facing rejection and you have to push through? Because obviously a lot of people, they face that and they're like, you know what? I'm done. I'm out. I'm retiring.
Yeah.
I'm retiring after 3 gigs. But, you know, in your case, you didn't. You continued to go. So tell me about your identity and the story you tell yourselves to keep going in those moments.
So I went and did a performance at this black box theater there, you know, and I hadn't performed probably for about a year. And so I was rusty. I had no new material I was ready to test, especially in front of this audience, because it couldn't have had more than 15 people in the room, just small. And I had never been to this place before. And my friend, I was at the Improv having dinner in Hollywood Improv, which is my home base. And a buddy of mine came in and he was doing a set in the lab at the Improv. And then he was like, I'm going to go do this room. Have you ever been to this room down Melrose? And I said, I've never even heard of it, you know, and I know everything, every room. I'm famous and I can go in any real club, like the Comedy Store, the Laugh. I can go anywhere and be like recognized and walk in. But I never been to this place. I didn't know what the heck it was, and I was like, "Sure, I'll go out and see this room." And then they said, "You want to get up?" And I said, "Sure, I'll get up." And then they ended up putting me last. And then I got chuckles in certain places, but I got, you know, on tried and true material that I knew worked. I performed it for years. You know, it's material that's personal to me and it works. But like it didn't sell. It didn't sell in this particular moment. And I remember, you kind of go, okay, whatever, this and nothing was selling anyway, except for some people who had more, these audience members were more familiar with, you know, but, you know, I go through, you know, 8 minutes of my set or 10 minutes of my set. And then I said goodbye. But at the end of it, this guy who was just there, you know, seemed to be connected to the people who are running the room. But he didn't perform anything, but he said to me, he goes, good luck. What did he say? He said, good luck with being relevant or something, or it was a derogatory thing. It was like, you know, basically that, you know, what I was saying, nobody could understand because it wasn't relevant to them. It didn't make any, and that's growing older, right? It's like things that I think are funny are no longer funny. We're living now in political correctness in the comedy world. We're living where people are very oversensitive. People don't want, unless you are Chappelle and have graduated to a point where we expect it from him to kind of hit below the belt a bit and do, you know, he doesn't care at all about what anybody thinks, you know, he's going to do, but folks who aren't that or aren't recognized, you can say things and be canceled now, and it's like, it's sad because that's the last place that needs to happen, right? It's like, you leave comedy alone.
Right.
You can be mad if somebody's doing something in business. You can be mad if somebody's doing something inappropriate on the street. I'm not, but it's like comedy is that last bastion, that last space of you being, told that this is funny. It's funny. I love.
Yeah, allows us to laugh at anything.
I love, stereotypes. I love talking about stuff. You know what I mean? I have this one joke where I say gay in it, and I'm not gay, but just by saying gay and not being gay, is a problem. And I grew up in, California, in the Bay Area. I grew up where, the gayest mecca in the world, when you talk about Castro District and everything else. Many of my friends are gay. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not at all homophobic or anything, but if you aren't, you as a white man can't talk about black stuff, even though I grew up in brown and black neighborhoods and have more of a black cultural position in my body than I do a traditional white boy position in my body. I can't necessarily safely in this market. I could back in the day, but in this market, I can't safely go out there and do things that would work. I grew up, my first comedy moments were in black comedy clubs. I was the one of 5 white dudes that got to play, consistently in a black comedy club. I was there when Kevin Hart started in LA. I was there when Leslie Jones started. I was there with, Dion Cole, who's famous for Blackish. Like, I've been, Lavelle Crawford, Earthquake, Rodney Perry, like, David A. Arnold, who subsequently, rest in peace, he passed away recently. But like all these guys, I grew up in that community. Plus, Richard Pryor, Eddie Murphy, Bill Cosby, prior to all the, all the things. But, these were my mentors. But, if you are white and middle-aged, like I am, it's such that you just don't have the authority to speak on things in this market that you used to be able to do. So how do
you navigate that? It's obviously a whole nother element to, because whenever you put content out, whether it's humor or anything else, but especially in humor, there's a lot of vulnerability, right? And if people don't laugh at your joke, these things can hurt. So you've got all that pressure, but then you also got this pressure. You have to be careful because if you say something that's, perceived the wrong way, it could end your career.
Right.
How do you navigate that? And is there a way for us to, in the future, you think, begin to collaborate or come together more where it's, where maybe there's not as much of a, I don't know how to say it, but just where we're able to allow each other a little bit of grace, in things like comedy, but in a way that's healthy, in a way that's responsible. How do we do that?
Well, I don't, in comedy, I think you harm yourself by giving in to the what if, right? And that's when you decide to give up what your role and responsibility is. Your role and responsibility is make me laugh, mother.
Right.
And so to me, I'm old enough in the business and have probably like the callous that's just, I don't care. Cancel me. And then let me come after you on the cancel. Cause I'm lightweight. I haven't done anything like, I made a joke last night, I don't know if you pay attention to the news, but I had a show, a guy who comes in often, and he's, doing this audio only show and they took a little 5-minute break and we went outside just to get some air. And I said to them, I said, I'm working on my Russell Brand. And they're like, what? And I was like, no, not an impression of him, just his rape. Because he's been accused of all of these. He's been, there's like, it's coming out as a firestorm right now, and it's so dated back. But that's the dark, that's the dark joke, right? You know what I mean? And you said rape, you know what I mean? But that's the news. Yeah. That's what's happening right now.
And you're just being playful. You're not obviously being literal, or you're just being goofy. That's the whole point of comedy, right?
Yeah. But people will take that kind of, whoa,
Yeah.
But that was the point, right?
That's the shock value.
That's the shock value of it, because it's called a left turn.
Yep.
you're assuming I'm working on my Russell Brand, and people be like, wait a minute, I've seen him in the news. Why would you be doing a Russell Brand? Are you
Right.
trying to make a Russell Brand impression? Do you think that's going to be funny on stage to do Russell Brand impression? Oh, not his voice and his,
Yeah.
the other. So
That's not just a left turn. That's a whole U-turn. No,
right.
I'm just
Yeah.
kidding. No.
But I mean, that's where I find funny is doing things like that,
So do you, is it, I mean, a lot of the people I've met that are doing a lot of this kind of stuff in their, in show business or in comedy, there's, they develop a very thick skin, like what you just said, like, I don't care. I'm going to be me.
Right.
And it forces kind of a radical authenticity in a way, because you don't have a choice. Because I guess maybe in a way you get conditioned because you've been rejected. You've been on stage and people have not laughed. And, for me as a person who creates content as well, like my passion is to like do things that make an impact, that help people and all that kind of stuff. But when you do it, it's vulnerable, right? And you can go through a lot of stages of that. And I think it's kind of amazing and profound that, people who do this long enough, especially in really, challenging professions like what you've done, they just develop kind of an attitude of like, dude, you can't hurt me. Like, I don't care because I'm me and I'm going to be me, and it's not up to you, right? It's up to me.
Exactly.
How did you develop that? Is there any tricks to that for people who may struggle with that?
I think that confidence is a hard commodity.
Mm.
I don't know how to sell it other than, risking is the key. You have to take a risk.
Mm-hmm.
And then you develop the confidence from and quite frankly, be okay with failure. I was talking to somebody the other day. It's like we live in this place now where, I'm before the everyone gets a trophy generation,
Mm-hmm.
right? Where like I was an MVP one year in baseball, and then the next year I wasn't, and then 2 years later I was, and it was the way it was played. You got the trophy for being an MVP, and then you didn't if you didn't measure up to the other guy or the other person. So it was like, but I didn't live in an era of everyone receives a trophy. And I think that harms us, honestly. I think that, one of the things too with rearing a child now, it's like, I remember growing up, watching everybody else have children, because I'm almost 50. And it's like, for me, everybody going like, I'm going to give my child the life that I never had. I'm going to make sure that all the things that I had to go through that were problems for me, I'm going to make sure that my child doesn't have to feel those things. And I say to them all the time, I go, do you think you're the shit? Do you think that you are great at what you are and who you are? I mean, I'm not trying to, but I mean, if you and your ego, if you don't have an ego, one big problem. You must have an ego. Everybody must have an ego. Mm. But if you are sitting there going like, yeah, no, I got this. I'm good. I know what I'm doing, but I'm worried about everybody else. I'm worried about my kid. Is he going to, if I'm the extrovert, but is my child going to be the introvert? And what I say is like, if you think that your life sucked because you got spanked as a kid, or you had this thing that happened, or, life was not delivered to you the same way. I mean, my life was hard growing up. It's a bit easier now, but it was hard growing up. I'm not going to shelter my child from having a similar experience. I'll be there to oversee and protect. But if my child gets bullied, we're going to talk about how you deal with it. We're not going to eliminate bullying because some kids don't know how to, I used to bully the bullies. That's what I did. I was a chameleon. If you were going to bully the nerds because you were the sports jock and so was I was the jock, I was going to come to the nerd's aid, and be like, dude, you're bigger than him. What the hell? You want to fight? You want to pick on somebody your own size. Back in the day, it's what we did, but this idea that we've got to shelter children away from, we got to put helmets on them. The mother of my child who's my ex is such that, she was buying knee pads. So when she was learning how to crawl, she would have knee pads on. I said, no, that's how you strengthen the knees. I've never heard it or seen a kid with knee pads on. I rode bicycles without a helmet my entire life. I currently ride a bike and don't have a helmet. Now that might be stupid, but I just grew up that way. I used to come barreling down on a BMX bike, that had all the pegs and the ability for the front axle to do 360s, so you can do all the tricks and stuff. And I remember barreling down this one hill in upstate New York where I lived called Downing Hill, and I took out a metal mailbox with my face because I turned the corner real sharp and the gravel slipped and the bike came out from underneath me and I hit my face and took out a mailbox. And you want to know what the homeowner with the mailbox, they were like, "Are you okay?" "No, I hurt myself really bad." "Well, I hope you get better. When are you going to replace our mailbox?" Do you know what I mean?
Right.
And then it was like, yeah, I had to pay with mowing lawns and doing paper routes and things of that nature. This mailbox, and mailboxes were not cheap for a kid.
Right. And your modeling career just ended too. So you can't make that money.
Yeah.
Anymore.
No, I mean, it started to really beat up my nose and my face. But like, to me, it was like, I'm thankful that I lived in a time where we weren't trying to not allow people to fail, make mistakes, fall down, get back up. You scrape, we're going to get road rash. We're going to scrape our knees. We're going to get cut. We're going to burn our hand. These are things we're going to do, and we can't not have them happen, because the quicker we can get through those beats, if you're a kid right now and you go through all of your adolescence never burning your hand, but finally as an adult you burn your hand, I think that's way past the time. You know what I mean? Because you should have burnt your hand as a kid and definitely burn your hand as an adult. I mean, I've electrocuted myself. You know what I mean? Like many times, just changing an outlet. You know what I mean?
So because of all these experiences, take us into what you're telling yourself. You go on stage in a set or you did something and you utterly failed. In that moment, what do you tell yourself to come back to get back on the horse and ride again, kind of a thing?
It's funny. I don't really think too much about it. I wave it off, because again, for every 10 times, you're going to fail 9 and have 1 successful beat. It's not, if you live in a place of wanting a 90% return on success, you're already broken, in my opinion. You want more failure so that the successes are more pronounced. They're better, I would be nothing if I hadn't failed and put myself in positions that were so disappointing. I would be nowhere. I would have never been able to start this business. I would never have taken the risk of moving it into a house, then out of a house, growing it big, and spending 16-hour days, 7 days a week doing it. If not more.
Well, this has been a real treat. I love your perspective. It's fascinating to talk to you, and I really appreciate your time. And I think everyone's going to really enjoy this. And so, just want to say thanks to Michael. And, you don't have to be perfect to contribute. So go out there and do something great today.
We live in a profound